This is a case of two brothers, actually. This is a double healing. So this is Cameron and Caden Sturz. I don't have a picture of the boys themselves, but I believe at the time they were 9 years old and 5 years old when they were healed. But they were both born with a very rare genetic disease called glycogen storage disease. And this is basically like, you know anything about diabetes, right? Where you have to watch your blood sugar levels, your glucose levels. They have to take insulin every day, and they have to get their fingers pricked to realize that. This is like diabetes, but much, much, much worse in terms of it being like extremely fatal. Not that diabetes isn't dangerous, but this is something that is far more difficult to treat and to stabilize, right? So both of these boys got very sick, and tests showed that they had a particular gene that had caused this. So they go to a hospital. At first, it's in Iowa, and then I believe they go to the University of Florida. They have a special research program there for this disease. And so every day these boys are taking cornstarch. They had to have very high amounts of cornstarch, and they had to get their blood taken 3 times every single day to test to make sure. So you can imagine how exhausted their family was. And so as they get older, as they're getting into their early teens, or at least Cameron was in his early teens. His brother was getting 8 or 9 at the time. They progressively got more sick. So they had to up the dosages. I believe they first got sick around 2011 or so, or 2009 maybe. And this got progressively worse. So for the next few years, they're in and out of hospitals constantly. And I don't know if you know much about the Make-A-Wish Foundation, but they're considered terminally ill. So they go to this charity of a fundraiser, and they get to go to Disney World because they're not expected to have more than a few years to live with this condition, because usually you don't live very long with this. And so as they go older, this gets worse. And so they have to take more and more cornstarch. Their liver starts swelling up because this really attacks the liver and causes severe abdomen problems and pain. And so these boys are constantly in pain. These young kids are constantly hurting because their liver swelling and it's affecting their intestines, the stomach, and so forth. This picture here is a picture, I believe, from Caden, one of his x-rays. You can see the abnormalities where the spleen and liver are just inflamed in that way. It looks very painful. So both of them were constantly surgeries, having to have feeding tubes, and having to eat cornstarch. So both of them were considered, terminally ill and close to dying. Their mother goes to this healing conference and their mother was very Pentecostal, so she believed in healing and so forth. But she goes to this conference, I believe it was in Illinois, I want to say. They're from Iowa originally, but she goes up to Illinois, and she feels the Holy Spirit telling her to take her kids there. So she takes her kids the next day, and both the pastors lay their hands on the kids and pray for them and say that, I have a word of faith that God's going to heal you, essentially. And both of the boys said that they could feel the disease leaving their body. They felt a lot better at that moment. So normally we could say, well, that's suggestion. It's this placebo effect, right? People feel better afterwards. But the very next day, because remember, they're taking their blood samples 3 times every day because they have to stabilize this. The next day, when they're taking their blood samples, the nurse says for the first time, wow, their samples look normal. Cameron's looks completely normal for the first time. What have we been doing? It's only been getting worse to this point. Caden's had significantly improved, although it wasn't completely normal. So this was in January when this happened. So the next few days, Cameron still maintained normal, and eventually he's like, Mom, I don't want to be taking the cornstarch anymore. So his mom is very reluctant, where she's like, okay, we'll take you off the cornstarch. So they do, and he was still healthy. No problems happened when they took him off the cornstarch. And again, they need this to live. So if you have this disease, going off of cornstarch, that's like not having insulin for diabetes. That's extremely dangerous to be doing. But he did this without any ill effects, and his blood samples still looked normal. Caden rapidly improved over the course of it, and although he wasn't immediately better, he also began to improve where he could eventually be off the cornstarch within a few months, and had the feeding tube removed. So within a few months, both of these boys were perfectly healed and perfectly healthy, and were able to go off of all palliative care, all palliative treatments. And their doctor had no explanation for this. They're saying this is a disease that is not curable. The only treatments that you can give are stuff to just endure your life, to make it last a little bit longer, like the cornstarch. This can't reverse the effects of it. So they had no explanation for why Cameron and Caden suddenly got better at the same time, right after being prayed for. And these boys are still alive today. Their mom has a Facebook account. She posts pictures of them all the time. This happened about a decade ago now, but they're still alive and healthy. So as far as I know, this is the only case of glycogen storage disease ever going away in this context. And the medical community was not really sure how to explain this, but it is a pretty remarkable instance of of healing in this way. And so I think it is interesting that the timing was a little bit different between the two boys, but both of them rapidly either got better or got completely better within 24 hours of that prayer, even though prior to that they'd only be getting progressively worse. And again, there's no condition, there's no cure for this condition. So I think it's a very uplifting story, and it's really sad when you're seeing these kids, very young kids, dying of a disease, and their mom felt like there was no hope because it's genetic. There's nothing they can do. They can't, other than gene therapies, they can't really go out and do anything. So the fact that these boys got completely cured prior to counter to all expectation is remarkable, and certainly she considers it to be a miracle.
Man, I got goosebumps when I was listening. I don't know these people, but like the whole story is like
Right.
filled with this supernatural presence and power of God. And I enjoy these things and eyewitness reports, especially when they're not just you know, like rumors. If they're backed up, like with all the details that you're giving, these things
Right.
boost up my faith so much, and my joy and my thankfulness and my emotional side. Like somehow is able to be shown more when God touches that soft spot in my heart, like no one else can. So I enjoy these stories.
Absolutely. And it's so encouraging to see that, especially when people are in such dire situations that you just sometimes do feel, hopeless to that degree. And so it's really uplifting to see that.